From abandoned hospitals with eerie labyrinths to mysterious doors leading to underground secrets, deserted places always attract us with their stories and undisclosed secrets. In every corridor, in every forgotten trunk or dust-covered room, something so shocking may be hidden that even the bravest traveler would shudder. Today we set out on an exciting journey through the most frightening discoveries found in empty buildings around the world. You are on the Top Facts Black channel. Do not forget to subscribe, and of course, let us go. Some people who are fascinated by exploring abandoned buildings believe that the scariest moments do not occur when encountering ghosts, but when meeting ordinary individuals who behave in extremely strange ways. Thus, one brave group of adventurers decided to look inside an abandoned psychiatric hospital in the middle of the night. Their path led them through long corridors lined with broken furniture and covered in graffiti left by other curious wanderers. At first, everything seemed like a horror movie set. Empty wards, torn curtains swaying in the wind, and the occasional echo of their own footsteps. But when almost at the end of the corridor, they spotted a figure slowly gliding past a small window. Their hearts sank. The entire area was far from any residential houses, and the only vehicle in the parking lot was their own car. The travelers called out to the stranger, hoping it was another explorer, yet they received only an ominous silence in response. At that moment, the tension reached its peak. The possibility that this could be someone living in the hospital's basements or harboring darker motives compelled them to leave immediately. They found no logical explanation, and that encounter still haunts their imagination today. In a mountainous region of Japan, there is a tiny village that has almost died out due to time and the departure of its inhabitants. Once, about 300 people lived there, but by the last few decades, only a few dozen residents remained. However, instead of the usual empty houses, travelers began to find numerous life-size dolls on the streets, near buildings and in the fields. All these figures were created by a local woman who decided to replace her departed neighbors with artificial doubles. She painstakingly sewed clothes for them out of old garments, gave them realistic faces, and placed them where people once went shopping, studied in school, or fished. In the empty classrooms, child-sized dolls now sit at desks, as if frozen in an eternal lesson. Passing by these scenes, one cannot shake the feeling that the very walls remember the children's voices, and the dolls seem to stare straight into your soul. Interestingly, some tourists who encounter these replacements of residents feel not only fear, but also longing and sadness. This village is like a museum or an open-air theater where every mannequin is a ghost of a bygone era. Nevertheless, the atmosphere is so peculiar and eerie that it feels as though the residents might one day return and come to life together with their doll copies. Now let us slightly change the tone and imagine a situation that seems both terrifying and like a miraculous salvation. A group of explorers making their way through overgrown thickets toward an abandoned building came upon a door that was clearly unlocked. Entering inside, they could barely make out a person lying on a bed, motionless and looking extremely ill. His condition was so dire that describing the details is too painful. It seemed he had been living there in inhumane conditions and was no longer able to care for himself. Fearing for his life, the explorers called for an ambulance. It turned out that the man was on the brink of complete exhaustion and needed urgent medical assistance. Thanks to that chance entry into the abandoned building and the alertness of the uninvited guests, the doctors arrived in time. This story serves as a reminder that in such places, one may stumble upon not only horrifying remnants of the past, but also individuals desperately in need of rescue. In an abandoned wildlife park located near Melbourne, an Australian known on a video hosting platform for exploring mysterious places made such a bizarre discovery that it literally exploded across social media. Picking his way through piles of garbage and deserted enclosures, he came upon a huge tank filled with a strange liquid. Approaching closer, he saw a gigantic great white shark, completely preserved in formaldehyde. This shark, nicknamed Rosie, had once become entangled in fishing nets by accident and was caught more than 2 decades ago. She was prepared and exhibited as a museum piece in a small private park. But when the establishment closed, nobody wanted or was able to transport such a cumbersome exhibit. Over time, the tank cracked, the formaldehyde began to evaporate, and the explorer was confronted with a truly disturbing sight: an ocean predator, forever frozen in a grotesque pose among heaps of trash. Public outcry spurred local authorities and a tourist organization to take Rosie under their care. Now the shark is being restored and promised a more respectable display. This story is a reminder that discoveries in abandoned places can be not only horrifying, but also significant from both scientific and cultural standpoints. During the dismantling of a dilapidated building erected in the 30s of the previous century in a Ukrainian village, contractors encountered a horrifying find. The foundation and part of the walls were literally built on hundreds of headstones. It immediately became clear that in the past, someone had used grave markers for construction, concealing existing burial grounds. According to local residents, there used to be a cemetery here. But after political and historical upheavals, some evidence of the past was simply erased, and the stones were repurposed as building materials. Later, it turned out that the headstones belonged to a Mennonite community with familial ties to settlers from Canada. The stones were adorned with characteristic carved motifs. Possibly the people who lived in that house did not even suspect that they were residing directly above old graves. It is chilling to imagine what dreams might have visited the occupants, for in such places, legends of ghosts and restless spirits often arise by themselves. In one of the suburbs of Oxford, England, there was once a luxurious estate owned by a famous rock musician. Over time, the mansion passed into the hands of new owners who, for some reason, left it to rot and decay. Explorers venturing into the basement discovered something that gave them chills. Against a wall stood a tombstone bearing the name of a boy who, judging by the dates, had died at a very young age. The stone resembled either a family heirloom or a sinister hobby of the previous residents. According to legend, the owners of the house experienced a tragedy. One of its inhabitants was seriously injured when a family member accidentally fired a pneumatic rifle. Although the tombstone likely had no direct connection to this incident, its presence in a forgotten basement adds a layer of eerie mystery to the story. Some assume that the stone might have been used as part of horror-themed party decor or kept in memory of a pet that had a person's name. But one must admit that seeing such an item among the cobwebs and abandoned surroundings is not for the faint of heart. Once, a thrill-seeker traveling through Anderlecht in Belgium decided to explore an old educational institution where veterinarians used to be trained. Rumor had it that the building was closed toward the end of the 20th century, and since then it had stood as a set of grim corridors filled with the stale scent of time. Entering the basement, the explorer noticed a foul odor, reminiscent of the stench of formaldehyde, and realized that here lay the source of long-standing legends. It turned out the basement held dozens, if not hundreds, of jars and containers with animal organs, dogs, cats, and rabbits, all preserved in eerie solutions. Many were labeled and arranged in such an orderly fashion that it seemed someone had been studying them right up until the school's closure, then fled in haste, leaving everything behind. The dust, crumbling plaster, and this anatomy textbook collection created the impression of a mad scientist's laboratory where the occupant might return at any moment to continue his experiments. An event more reminiscent of a Hollywood action movie took place in Houston, Texas. A person in a state of severe drug intoxication called the police, claiming to see a live tiger in an abandoned house. The authorities initially dismissed this as a hallucination, but they decided to check anyway. To their astonishment, there really was a tiger in a small metal cage in the garage. The animal appeared exhausted, clearly receiving minimal care. There were some packages of meat lying around, but no indication that any owners lived there permanently. The police called in specialists to save the wild creature and relocate it to a shelter for large cats. Just the thought that a powerful predator might be hidden behind the walls of a deserted building is awe-inspiring. Stumbling upon it by chance would probably leave little chance of a calm escape. One of the oldest medical institutions in Louisiana was Charity Hospital, established back in the 18th century and for centuries providing care to thousands of patients. But after the devastating Hurricane Katrina, the hospital fell into complete disrepair. The building was severely damaged by flooding, vast areas were submerged, and equipment fell into ruin. When the most fearless explorers, armed with flashlights and mold-resistant masks, began to venture inside, they were shocked. Everywhere lay forgotten medical records, blood and urine samples, and in some rooms there were even histological preparations and organ fragments awaiting analysis. It was as though time had stopped at the exact moment of evacuation, and the staff never returned to finish their work. The half-dark corridors where biological materials had been left to age for years evoked images of ghostly patients and operating rooms forever abandoned. Unbelievable as it may sound, another preserved great white shark was once discovered in a different abandoned park in Australia. For several years, the park operated as a local attraction, but then the owners violated animal welfare regulations, lost their license, and simply shut down the facility. An explorer visiting this forsaken place found a huge tank containing a brownish liquid, and inside it lay the body of a massive ocean predator. Such a discovery would startle even the calmest individual. Imagine walking through an abandoned pavilion where everything is covered in dust, walls are cracked, aquariums are half destroyed. And in one of them, like a sinister exhibit, a great white shark lies frozen. Although by that time the creature no longer posed a danger, its presence among the ruins leaves an unforgettable impression and stirs the strangest questions. One instantly imagines the joyful laughter of children and the lively sounds of merry-go-rounds, but that fairy tale has long since ended. In Lancashire, England, a deserted amusement park has turned into a true museum of nightmares. All the rides are rusty, coated in dust and mold, and in the so-called indoor attraction stands a host of mannequins once meant to scare visitors. Now these figures, with their paint peeling off, partially undressed and with broken mechanisms, manage to frighten even the bravest explorers. A roaming adventurer in the park reported that some of the mannequins still contain parts of old electrical drives. They may have moved once, waving their arms and turning their heads, heightening the feeling of fear for visitors. Now imagine if one of them suddenly started up among the ruins and greeted you with empty eyes. Few would dare linger there, for even in a motionless state, these dolls look incredibly sinister. When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, countless buildings were deserted in haste, and many people never returned to recover their belongings. One of the starkest and most frightening manifestations of this abandonment is the situation involving biological samples left in a forsaken hospital. Here, among darkened corridors and broken doors, daring explorers find containers with organs preserved in fluid, refrigerators holding old test samples, bags of blood, and other items that make one's heart clench. Nobody disposed of them or moved them to a safer location. Perhaps chaos, haste, and a complete loss of utilities played a tragic role. As a result, wandering these corridors is like being in a time-frozen laboratory of horrors, where every open room reveals new, shocking surprises. In one video, explorers under the nickname Kel Onar visited an abandoned building in England rumored to have once been a military facility. From the first step, they were greeted by an unpleasant smell and layers of bird droppings, and on the wall was a menacing warning, "Do not go upstairs." Of course, such a warning did not stop curious enthusiasts. Climbing the stairs, they noticed more and more dead pigeons and eventually found several headless birds. Worst of all was the inscription, "Too many birds," as though someone had been systematically driving the birds out of this deserted place. The explorers soon heard strange footsteps and a male voice calling them from above. Terrified, they decided to leave, but as soon as they went outside, they were confronted by an angry security guard who called the police. When asked about the dead pigeons, he only gave a cryptic reply. "It is a ghost. It is a ghost." It remains unclear whether this was the work of a strange recluse living there or if the birds died for other reasons. In any case, the atmosphere was extremely tense, and few would dare explore the upper floors alone. Imagine an old hospital somewhere in the southern United States. Its long corridors have long been closed off, silence reigns, and inside a few medical instruments remain. An explorer then finds an entire bathtub filled to the brim with something brownish red, in which float shapes resembling brains. Upon closer inspection, it turns out these are real specimens, presumably preserved for study. It sends chills down the spine to think how they ended up there. Usually in such institutions, brains and other human tissues are kept neatly in jars of formalin, labeled clearly for students or medical professionals to study. Yet seeing them all tossed into a bathtub is not for the faint of heart. The question arises immediately: what would prompt the staff or owners to do this? Perhaps something extreme happened, like a sudden closing, leaving no time for proper procedures. It is especially intriguing that nobody could definitively determine whether these exhibits were human or animal. Some specimens were large enough to appear human. However, there was never an official explanation. Although World War II ended many decades ago, its aftermath still surfaces in the most unexpected places. In Greece, for instance, workers discovered an old grenade in a residential area, and in Germany, even now, there are frequent evacuations due to bombs dropped by Allied aircraft that never detonated at the time. The situation is particularly precarious in German cities, where explosives experts regularly receive calls when, during construction or excavations, another dormant aerial bomb is uncovered. Such munitions can become active at any moment. Explosives do not have an expiration date, and even after many years they retain their destructive power. Practically all major German cities have experienced multiple evacuations over the decades to safely remove and defuse bombs. It is frightening to think how many more such surprises remain hidden underground. In the capital of Thailand, Bangkok, there is a shopping center that was never officially approved for full use due to permit issues. Consequently, it was abandoned, the roof collapsed, and rainwater began pooling inside the structure, transforming the floors into makeshift ponds. At some point, local residents released koi carp there, presumably to deal with insects or out of sheer curiosity. Over time, the fish reproduced, filling all available space. Now, upon entering the flooded shopping center, one can see an entire lake where dozens or possibly hundreds of colorful carp swim among pillars and staircases. The sight is both mesmerizing and unsettling. Nature appears to have reclaimed the territory, creating its own exotic oasis amid the concrete ruins. A few days before the holidays in December of 2011, contractors inspecting an old farm in Pickering, in the province of Ontario, stumbled upon a discovery so chilling that they had to call the police. In the basement of the house, which had been uninhabited for several years, there was a room with a door secured from the outside by several locks. The most terrifying aspect was that the room contained thick chains hanging from the ceiling, and the walls were soundproofed. Photographs that soon appeared online revealed details that fueled many theories, from suspicions of criminal detention to the possibility of some underground-themed games. While the police were investigating the house for evidence, a sudden fire broke out, destroying most of the proof. People could only suspect that someone might have wanted to hide all traces. In a German resort town, there is a decrepit building that tour guides and bloggers call the House of Dr. Anna. Legend has it that this woman was a urologist who ran a private practice on the ground floor. After the clinic closed and the interior fell into decay, medicines, flasks, and medical instruments remained inside, as though the staff simply stood up and walked out, leaving everything as it was. However, the most shocking things are the glass jars containing preserved human kidneys. A laboratory table, yellowed documents, and dusty windowsills crowded with such exhibits create a cinematic scene. Perhaps secret experiments took place here, or maybe Dr. Anna was genuinely studying kidney pathologies and maintained a vast collection of samples for science. One can speculate endlessly, but the sight of these containers sends a shiver through the body. An explorer named Frank, who runs a video channel about abandoned mines, once decided to descend into an old gold tunnel in Australia on a cold and rainy night. The activity itself is already not for the faint of heart. Narrow passages, no light, the risk of cave-ins. But at a certain point, he noticed strange hissing and murmuring sounds echoing from deeper in the mine. On the recording, the noise sounds like whispers or commands spoken by unknown voices. Frank had often encountered unusual echoes and the sound of wind in tunnels, but even he admitted feeling uneasy this time and halted his exploration. Some viewers of the video concluded that it could have been some sort of ritual or dark ceremony. Others suggested that the sounds were produced by drafts passing through ventilation shafts. Nevertheless, the fact remains, being down there alone is quite creepy, and few would dare discover what lies farther in. A team of bloggers once stumbled upon a house deep in the forests of Pennsylvania that looked from the outside like a simple old cottage. The moment they walked in, though, they felt a palpable tension. In the kitchen, they discovered a child's drawing board with an image of a person apparently hanged by the neck. In another room, they found a similar depiction, more detailed, featuring figures resembling family members. The atmosphere in the house suggested that the owners had suddenly vanished without taking anything. Dishes, furniture, children's toys, everything remained in place. In the footage recorded by the explorers, some viewers argued that the drawings could have been fake, made by someone who entered previously to heighten the fear factor. But even if that is the case, the eerie emptiness of the rooms and the ominous images on the boards invite questions about what really happened. Sometimes, an unknown history can be scarier than any movie monster. Thus, these deserted corners of the world continue to guard their secrets, evoking both curiosity and horror. Each one tells its own story of how easy it is to destroy the world around us and how frightening it is to leave behind what was never meant for strangers' eyes. If you have ever come across anything frightening or strange in similar places, be sure to share your stories. Perhaps your discovery will be the key to unlocking another mysterious secret. Their mysterious secret. Their mysterious secret.